Hello and welcome to this edition of Naturally Scott. I'm your host, Scott Harris, and I'm proud to be your host. I love the feedback we've been getting from the community, so thank you. Today's guest is Emily Fairfax. She is a genius in the area of ecohydrology, something I didn't even know existed, or certainly didn't know by name, with the University of Minnesota. We're going to be talking today about hydrology and water, but mostly we're going to be talking about beavers. And as the podcasts have gone on, for those who are listening regularly, I am becoming more and more fascinated with beavers and the impact they have on the wilderness and the habitat and everything that surrounds them. So I think you're really going to enjoy it. We're going to talk about some of the common misconceptions about beavers. We're going to talk about the ecosystems, or beavers being ecosystem engineers. We're going to talk about some of the big positive examples like Yellowstone National Park. We're going to be talking about beavers in the desert. Overall, we're just going to be talking about and wildfire resilience and the important role that beavers play in that. I think you'll be fascinated, and I think you'll come to think that beavers are extraordinarily important for our community, for conservation, for the habitat, for wilderness, and frankly, they're just fun to learn about. So settle in, listen to this, enjoy the time that we spend with Emily, and you might very well walk away with a new and different appreciation for little beavers. Well, actually, not even little. They get up over 100 pounds. I didn't know that. Anyway, enjoy the show. Thanks. Bye. Welcome to this edition of Naturally Scott. I'm your host, Scott Harris. And I say this in every episode. I'm excited about having you here, and I'm looking forward to it. But this one's a little bit different, and I'll explain why as we get going. My guest today is Emily Fairfax, who is with the University of Minnesota Ecohydrology. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Ecohydrology.
Ecohydrology. Okay, so I was close. But we're going to talk about that today. And that'll be part of our conversation. In general, we're going to be talking about beavers, which I am thrilled with. And I have to tell you, Emily, when I started this podcast, it was predominantly birding. I wrote a book called Why We Love Birds. I interviewed 52 of the premier birders in the country. And so they were easy guests. I don't mean that I took them for granted, but, anyway. But it has certainly morphed into more of a conservation show. And recent shows have had grizzly bear experts and rewilding and invertebrates and whatnot. But there has been a theme through these conversations, which is beavers. I was talking to somebody in the rewilding world recently, and they were talking about what they call the carnivore cascade, and how, if we save the grizzly bears and the wolverines and the cougars and the wolves and stuff, everything else follows. And then casually mention, but really all we have to do is save the beavers. And then I was interviewing somebody just a couple days ago about invertebrates. And I was talking about that. And I said, how important is that to the overall? And obviously it's all tied together. And he goes, well, honestly, it's not as important as beavers. And so I have been so looking forward to this conversation. I've grown fascinated, and I'm really excited to learn so much about this. And I have to do a quick call out. I have two best friends dating back over 50 years since junior high school. One of his name is Steve Hayes. The other one's Frank Sierra, who's the producer of the show. But Steve Hayes and I go back. And Steve is the one who a few weeks ago, he listens to the show. So you better hear this, Steve. And he said, Scott, whatever you do, you have to have beavers on. It is just, that's the world changing thing. I've done a deep dive, and there we go. So we're going to talk about that. But before we do, I think we have to talk about where our paths may have crossed in the past. You taught at Cal State Channel Islands?
I did, yeah.
I was on the board at Cal State Channel Islands.
Were you really? When were you there?
Well, my wife and I retired to South Carolina 6 years ago. So through 2020, we lived our whole lives in Ventura County. We were there when it very first started, before it even opened. And then when Dick Rush was the president, and Dick's still a good friend. And we did what we could. I gave a commencement speech, and it was great. I was reading through your bio, and I thought, Cal State Channel Islands, what are the odds? What did you teach at Cal State?
I was in environmental science and resource management, and we would have overlapped by 1 year because I started in 2019.
Okay. All right. And by then I was phasing out because we were getting ready to go. So we missed, and I'm sorry that we did. I wish we had met then. And it's a great university. It's a terrific place. it's not Minnesota. Although ironically, that's where Dick Rush, the president that I worked with the most, that's where he came from.
Is it really?
Yeah. Yeah. He was president of one of the University of Minnesota campuses.
Hmm.
I do not remember which one. So Dick, if you're watching, my apologies. But there you go. So anyway, it's kind of neat that there was a little tiny bit of an overlap there. All right. So let's start. How did you get interested and fascinated with beavers? What brought you there, and what were your passions pre-beavers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was not always interested in beavers explicitly. I wasn't like a kid going out saying, I'm going to be a beaver scientist when I grow up. I really liked wetlands. And for a lot of my childhood, I was living in Indiana, and we didn't have a ton of wetlands. We had quite a bit of corn. So I have these very distinct and fond memories of the school field trips we would take to local wetland preserves. And you'd see turtles, and you'd see salamanders, and you'd see frogs, and all these interesting birds. And it was a completely different world than you get in the bus and you drive through the corn and you go back home. What I never knew was that you could do jobs with wetlands. So I went to college and I studied physics and chemistry. I really wanted to keep all the science doors open. And after college, I went to New Mexico and I worked as a weapons system engineer because my preparation fit into that quite nicely. And I had student loans to pay, and that was definitely going to pay the student loans. And it was interesting work. I was doing really cool materials science and on the best spectrometers and spectroscopers and everything like that. And it ultimately was not for me. And so I was feeling pretty
I will
lost.
say, of the people I've interviewed for the books I've written and the podcasts I've done, you were the first one to come out of the weapons world. A lot of hunters, are also conservationists. Those two overlap a lot. But you're the first one to come out of the New Mexico military complex. So remind me not to piss you off during the show. I will make that a goal. So how do you go? When do you wake up and say, weapons are great, I've enjoyed it, thanks for paying off the student loans, but now I'm making the obvious shift from weapons to beavers?
It was actually when I sat down on my couch and happened to see the documentary Leave It to Beavers. And it was all of these different ologists that I'd never knew really existed, talking about beavers in Nevada and how they're so important in the deserts. And I didn't know beavers lived in the deserts. It was just so much new information at once that was really exciting. And I remember them saying pretty distinctly that there's still so much we need to learn about beavers because they're so important for droughts and for everything else. And as climate's changing, we got to pay attention. And I couldn't stop thinking about them. So I talked to my boss and mentor, who's great, and said, I think I need to go to grad school for some sort of earth or environmental science. And he was very supportive and also pushed me to start going to some lectures in the earth sciences at the lab so that I could talk a little better.
Boss?
Yep.
Wow, what a great boss he or she must have been.
Yeah, he was outstanding. Still good friends to this day.
Oh, that's great. I love it when people because obviously they wouldn't have wanted to lose you, but it's great that he said, okay, you know what, if you are going to do this, let me help.
Yeah. And, he's a real big fly fisherman too. So he was like, I get it. Like, you want to be outside in those environments.
That's fantastic. So what year was this when you had your documentary couch epiphany moment?
This would have been in 2015.
Okay. All right. So you were still in New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
You were still saving us from attacks from around the world. And instead you decided to save the environment.
Yep.
So what was that process? Where did you go to grad school?
I went to grad school at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I was in the Department of Geosciences.
I have to tell you, I spent years in Boulder. My mom lived there for 25 years. I went 3, 4, 5 times a year to Boulder and spent time on the campus. We have crossed paths again.
Starting to think maybe I've just been unknowingly following you around the country.
It would be an honor to have you stalk me. Let me know when you get to South Carolina.
I haven't gotten there yet, but I will let you know.
We are going to talk about beavers in South Carolina. So anyway, continue. I'm sorry. You went to Boulder, you went to university, you were in grad school, and you were studying
geosciences.
Okay. All
right.
Now you were focused on, in your head, beavers were where you were going?
hmm And it
Okay.
was really how beavers are changing water that I was really interested in. Like the beaver as the animal is awesome, but I've never truly been an ecologist. I've been more of a hydrologist that specifically is looking at how hydrology is changed by a big water rat in an animal. So that's where the eco and ecohydrology comes from. Uh, it was a good fit because in geosciences, you use physics and chemistry quite a bit. So my undergrad actually matched fairly well for that to understand when a beaver moves in, what does it do and why is that so important at the landscape scale rather than just this little pocket of environment around the beaver?
No, there is so much to cover. Let's let's start with this because I think there are a lot of misconceptions about beavers and the
hmm
damage that they do. And I was mentioning South Carolina. We've become friends with a gentleman, a very nice guy, an ex-Clemson football player and terrific man. And in the winter, he goes out and hunts and kills beavers at the bequest of landowners in the area. And I will admit, when we first moved here, I mean, I don't like seeing animals killed, but I honestly didn't lose a tremendous amount of sleep or think about the overall environment. But as I started to talk to people more about it, there is definitely it's almost like wolves. That there are people that love them and appreciate them and realize their value, and others that think they kill cows. Let's get rid of them. So tell me why people are concerned about beavers, why they would want them trapped and killed or not in their backyard. And then we can
Yeah,
talk about the value of what they do and where we're going with this.
beavers are really powerful and they are also really chaotic. And they can make huge changes extremely fast. It can take them a couple of days to turn an ordinary stream that's simple and maybe really easy to walk across into just this sprawling wetland. And while in general people like healthy ecosystems, to have your stream turned overnight into a wetland by a big water rat that didn't consult you and that you can't easily control is very frustrating. And then maybe they go chew down your favorite apple tree and you're like, it took 30 years to grow that and you took it down in a night. That's very frustrating. And I think that's where a lot of it's coming from is that people have, especially people that care about the environment, have really curated a place that they love. And when another agent comes into there and starts changing it, even if it is for the net better environmentally, it can be disheartening and you can lose things that you really liked about the landscape. And you can't go ask the beaver to stop. It won't listen. So you have, like, your brain says, I have to remove it because I can't thwart this animal. I can't convince it to stop chewing on my trees.
There's no
I must remove it.
compromise.
Hmm?
There's no compromise that can be reached.
Yeah. Or at least that's what people think. There are compromises for a lot of things, but they take effort from both parties. And sometimes the people don't want to buy in on that.
So tell me what those are. I own some property. A beaver dams something up downstream a little bit. Now suddenly my property is marsh. And like you said, the tree I planted with my daughter 15 years ago is now gone. I've got a 22. I'm not real happy about this. So tell me what I do instead of killing the beavers.
Yeah. First things first, if it's a flooding concern, you can put a pipe through the dam. And that is one thing beavers have not learned to engineer with is pipes. So a lot of things, like, it won't work. If you remove the dam, they'll rebuild it. If you notch the dam, they'll fix the notch. But put a pipe through it and put both ends of those pipe underwater so the beaver is not hearing that water sort of pouring through the pipe. You'll take the water level down, you'll reduce the swamping, and the beaver will be frustrated but not be able to fix it. It will be like, I can't stop this leak. I'm stuck. And it'll either accept the new water level or it'll leave. And either way, the problem is solved. If it's chewing on trees you like, beavers have also not figured out fencing. So you can put a fence around it. If the fence is not something that is acceptable because it's ugly or you don't want it there, you can use paint that has sand mixed in. It's not as effective as fencing, but pretty effective because it's really gritty on the beaver's teeth. And lately, for property owners that have larger amounts of land and who are more comfortable with managing animals, we have been encouraging folks to think about electric fencing. Beavers learn very quickly to not get shocked, and they live long enough that that memory kind of sticks for a few years. I know quite a few landowners that have used electric fencing very successfully to stop beavers from coming into their yards, but to allow them access to other parts of the property.
And why do I want them on my property at all? What I was happy before they got here. and now I have beavers. Why do I want to make an effort?
There's a lot of reasons to want to make an effort. I think the most personal reason that I've talked to people about and that I've heard is that, the number of disasters and the frequency of disasters and the intensity of disasters we're seeing with drought and with flood and with fire is just going up and up. And these are affecting property owners, but a lot of property owners don't have the capacity to protect their own property on their own. When you have beavers move in, the wetlands are some of your best defense against flood, against drought, and against fire. So it's almost like a very chaotic insurance policy where you don't get to dictate the terms, but when the disaster happens, it is there for you to help reduce that flood wave, to protect your plants when it's really dry. And during a fire, it can even stop the spread of that fire. So it's a good insurance policy for those. On a broader scale, you can hate beavers but love birds, and they're incredible hotspots of biodiversity. You can hate beavers but love fishing. They're great habitat for fish. It can really enrich that experience for you. I think there's a lot of reasons to want the beaver that don't actually have to do with the beaver itself. It's more about the environment the beaver creates.
Okay. And so what about, I mean, we're talking about individual landowners and whatnot. I'm sure that's a constant thing for you is the education process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And creating alternatives other than a 22. So
Yep.
that being said, what about on a larger scale? I've read about the impact that beavers have had in Alaska or in Yellowstone, where they're changing the habitat. Tell us about that on a more global scale.
Yeah.
What is the term? The ecosystem engineers.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about that.
Yeah. Beavers, when we refer to them as ecosystem engineers, that means that they're an animal that is controlling the physical earth. They're reshaping it to be the way they want it to be. And it's actually very few animals that can do that. So beavers are really good at this. They can build dams to slow down the water. They can dig canals to spread water out. They're felling trees, which is changing the vegetation composition and the structure of the environment around you. All of these things feel very jarring today because we don't have a lot of wetlands left. Depending on which state you're in, you have lost somewhere between 50 and 90% of your wetlands versus the historical amount. So when a beaver shows up and does that, it's like, whoa, this is wrong. This isn't what this land used to be. But actually it is. We used to have a lot more wetland. We had a lot more beavers too. We had about 10 times as many beavers in the past as we do today.
How many do we have today?
The estimate is about 10 to 40 million, and historically it was 100 to 400 million.
And were a lot of those slaughtered literally for their pelts?
Yeah. So during the fur trade, the beaver population was taken down to maybe 100,000, and it was for their pelts. It was also as a way to control land. So there were policies from these fur companies for traders and trappers to go down the rivers to kill every single beaver they saw and destroy it because they wanted to make fur deserts so that it discouraged other companies from coming out west and taking their territory. So they were both a political tool and a currency and a source of fur.
Wow. And when did we hit that low point? When did we hit 100,000 left?
That was probably by about 1850, 1860. The fur depletion and the beaver depletion kind of happened in a wave across the North American continent. Started back when people first started coming from Europe into the East Coast. And then as westward expansion was ongoing and people were doing the gold rush and all these other things, as they went, they were following fur and using fur. And beavers were across the entire continent, so they were constantly being exploited during this process.
Were they in every state?
They were in every state except for Hawaii. And in states like Louisiana and Florida, their range is a little more constrained by the presence of alligators.
Who enjoy the entire beaver, not just the fur.
Yep. Yeah. Beavers are super well defended against every terrestrial predator. All of their defense lies in basically making a big moat, though. And so when you put an alligator in the moat, it doesn't really work for the beaver anymore.
Well, when you say it, it sounds remarkably simple. Bad news for the beaver, I guess, but remarkably simple. So where are the big success stories? Again, I threw out Yellowstone and Alaska because I've read about them, but where have beavers been brought back and made these huge positive changes? Yellowstone seems to come up a lot with the reintroduction of wolves and and that, I guess, allowed the willows, which attract the beavers. And so, walk us through that from the beavers' point of view.
Yeah. Well, imagine a landscape where the beavers have been mostly wiped out. And then, in their absence, and also the absence of big predators, you just get tons of big grazers. So lots of deer, lots of elk, lots of moose. And they're moving across the landscape quite slowly, just eating everything in their way. And they share a food resource with beavers. So if you are a beaver that has managed to survive and you go to try to find new habitat, but it's a place that's had just lingering elk on it for the last 25 years, there's no food for you. You can't stop. You have to keep going. And maybe you don't find habitat and then you perish. And that was the case for a really long time. And there was just this huge imbalance in the ecosystem, specifically at Yellowstone, like I'm describing right now. But this is true across North America. We deleted most of our big predators. We let a lot of populations sort of run amok. We took away other ecosystem engineers like buffalo and prairie dog, just threw everything out of whack, and then kind of hoped it would fix itself. And it didn't, because you have to bring back multiple pieces. You have to have something that's going to get your big grazers moving, or at least reduce their population a little. Maybe that's predators, maybe that's some other policy. You need to let there be enough food for the beaver to show up. Once the beaver shows up, that's like hitting the gas on restoration, because it can now do a huge amount of work to create a wetland. And wetlands have little habitat pockets for just about everyone. And at least in the Western US, 80% of terrestrial species need access to a wetland at some point in their life cycle. So they're creating this vital habitat, whether that's for when you're nesting or when you are eating as a little baby, or it's somewhere that you go as an adult to hunt, or maybe it's just your watering hole. It's really important to have them. You just got to give beavers the bare minimum, like a stream that can be in terrible condition, some vegetation, and then they'll get to work. And over time, they will make it work. Beavers were one of the first animals back up into the blast zone after Mount St. Helens went off. And the first few iterations of them were not super successful in creating thriving wetland habitats. But every failed beaver made a difference and changed it a little bit. And after enough iterations, they could stick. And I've visited ponds in the blast zone of Mount St. Helens that have been there since early 1990s. And they're still in place, and they're still full of beavers, and they're absolutely packed with wildlife.
Wow. Now, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is surface level knowledge, which is pretty much what I have in everything. But with Yellowstone, as I understand the way it went, is when the wolves were reintroduced about 1995 or so, mid 90s. One of the first things they did, of course, was push the ungulates back, right? So the ones the moose and the elk and the deer, they pushed them away from the rivers and out of the marshlands and back into the forest. And then the willows started to grow a little bit, to your point, as everything wasn't eaten. And that was a siren call to beavers.
Mm-hmm.
And so then beavers started to show up and started to change the landscape, right?
Yep.
So how does that look? I mean, if we did a time capsule, if there was a big aerial view of how does that look? The first beaver walks in and goes, holy crap, there's willows and no gators, by the way, as it turns out. So what do they do now?
The very first order of business is to make some sort of a shelter for themselves, because wolves also love to eat beavers, and they are aware of that. So beavers will probably, on day one, start digging a den, and they'll burrow into the stream bank because that's the easiest and fastest thing for them to do. They would like to have a lodge, which is that more dome-like structure, but it takes time to build. It's not time for that yet. Dig into the den. Then they're immediately going to start building. They want deeper water. They want more water area. Everywhere they can swim is their safety zone. So expanding that is extremely high priority.
What is immediate? I mean, how long does it, a couple of days to dig a den in the side? And then they just go, okay, we're relatively safe here. Now we've built the garage. Let's build a whole house.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Okay.
I've seen a dam go up in less than a week, a fully built dam. They are fast and motivated.
So you have a running stream and no beavers, and a week later there is a dammed up stream?
Yep.
Do beavers move in packs or in pairs, or how do beavers get to an undammed stream?
Uh-huh.
Are they just...
They're so Beavers stay home with their parents until they're about 2 or 3 years old, sort of shadowing them and learning to be a beaver. And then they get kicked out when they're basically teenage beavers, and there's not room for them anymore. And they go off looking for habitat. That's called being a dispersing juvenile. During that first period, they are both looking for habitat and looking for a mate. And if they find one or the other first, they will figure that out and then continue on to task number 2. So maybe they bump into someone that they're like, this is a great mate, and then those two will go start looking for habitat. Or maybe it bumps into great habitat and it's like, I'll start building, a mate will come through and I can attract them with my habitat. And they are just immediately trying to make it better and trying to make it a good space for them. And then they will have babies at some point. They only have 1 litter per year. It's not a ton of babies all at once, and only about half of them make it to adulthood. And they're super territorial. So it's not like if another roaming beaver comes through, they'll be like, hey, pal, build with us. They would actually fight it and try to make it leave because they want to be in control of their territory.
And
Very similar to people.
how far have they traveled? So mom and dad wake up one day and say, that's it, you're gone. They kick you out. How far are you traveling?
They would prefer to travel on the order of like 5 to 10 kilometers. They can travel 100 miles if they have to. They will just keep going until they can find habitat. And especially if they're in a river that has some current that's helping them, they can go really, really far.
And then they just recognize something and say, I think we can build here. And so not dramatically different than humans making their way west.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty similar process. I'd say the beavers are a little more metered in their approach to it, and people traveled in a bit larger packs.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And do beavers mate for life?
They do. They will mate for life. They form socially monogamous pairs, but they are not entirely reproductively monogamous. Most animals aren't. But as far as monogamous animals go, they are in the, I think, the top 5. So 73%, I think, is the number. It's around there. Of siblings are actually blood siblings, 100%, instead of like half siblings. So they're mostly a tight family unit.
Okay. All right. So I go out and I find a spot and I say, I think I can get a girlfriend if I build a house here. So I do. Now, is it the male that does that, or is the female just as likely to pick a spot and start to build and hope that a male swings by?
Both of them can do it, and both of them will do it if they find good habitat, because it's too risky to not. They can't make it through winters without a pond and without a den. They can't make it through infinite numbers of nights without being hunted. So they need to settle down. There's a little bit of a gamble there about like, well, if I stop here, what if no one else comes through? And sometimes beavers will be on their own for their first year, and it's really hard for them. One of the best predictors of their success is if they can get a family started, because it's a lot of work running a beaver wetland.
I imagine. So what is that work? What does running a beaver wetland mean? I've moved out of my mud hut. I've built a dome. I've got a girlfriend. I've got a couple of kids. What's my day like? What am I doing now?
Beavers want to have a territory of 1 to 2 kilometers of stream length. So that's like their property. And on that property, they are going to build a lot of dams. They don't want just one dam. They'll have the dam that's usually the largest and that is creating the pond they spend most of their time in, and that's the primary dam. And then they'll build a bunch of what we call secondaries. And these are smaller dams. These are more just sort of shunting the water around, trying to increase the wetted area, trying to build aquatic connectivity. They don't want to be out on the land, so they're going to make as much water as they can. They'll dig canals. These are like their little water highways and city streets that they can swim through and float material home through. They are making scent mounds to tell other beavers to get out and to keep moving if they swim past. They are eating. They are grooming. They have to groom quite a bit to stay nice and oily and waterproof. And they're also playing and socializing and wrestling with each other. They are doing perimeter checks where they'll wake up and they'll swim around their whole territory and just see if anything is off. And that will inform their activities for the day. You can sit out and wait for a beaver to sort of show up in the evening and start its perimeter check. And if they notice you, it's really funny. They'll like swim by and they'll look at you a little bit suspicious, and then they'll maybe go underwater, but then they'll come back and they'll look at you a little suspicious again. And I've sat by enough ponds at this point that it's about 3 drive-bys before they decide if I'm suspicious or not. And if I just sit there like a big cow or some other animal that does not stress them out, they will go about their days in front of me. But if I'm being really intense and like staring them down with my predator eyes, then they will slap their tails and they'll continue to try to tell me to get out of their wetland. So you just gotta be
Is
very
that how
chill.
they tell you they slap their tails?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now, do beavers reach a point if they're successful and they've bred a couple times and they've built a network of dams and they feel they have some control over their 1 or 2 kilometers of shoreline? Will they be content with that? And now it's a matter of maintenance and living and having a good time and go to work every day and come home and hang out with the spouse and off we go?
Yeah, they would
So that
love to just have their spot and maintain it and not move around. They're pretty good about not overusing their food resources. Most of the things that they eat will grow back from stumps and cuttings. So as they're like clipping willows and dragging them around, they're also dropping pieces and then that grows new willows. So they're always regenerating their food. Sometimes they'll have to move if too much sediment comes in, like in a big flood, and it just brings tons of sediment with it. They might have to move upstream or downstream a little bit while they try to dig that out and make it useful again. But they would love to just stay in their spot, maintain it, do a little bit of repair here and there on the dams, and live the easy life.
And so again, assuming they're not in Louisiana or Florida, once they've successfully built, are they relatively safe from wolves and coyotes and whatever else might come after them?
They're definitely relatively safe as adults. When they are not adults, they're not super safe. Baby beavers are like the size of a sweet potato, and anything would eat them. So large predatory fish will eat them, owls, eagles, bobcats, foxes, coyotes, a lot of predators, including aquatic, can get babies. When they're fully grown, it's really just mountain lions, bears, wolves, and really, really lucky coyotes, because an adult beaver is going to be somewhere between 40 and 110 pounds. It's not a trivial animal to take down, and they outweigh a lot of these predators. So they're fairly safe once they are adults. It takes a bit of effort to get there. They grow pretty slowly. So when they go out to be their own beaver for the first time, they're probably between 20 and 40 pounds. It's only when they get to be like 15, 16, 17 years old that you see them cresting 90 or more. The record is
Wow.
110. That's not a normal weight for them.
I was up in Alaska recently and northern sea otters, which are bigger than the southern sea otters, and they get up a little over 100 pounds, and that is a massive animal.
Mhm.
If you had asked me, I would have thought an adult beaver would be in the 30 to 40 pound range. So from my ignorance knows no bounds portion of my life to find out they're 2.5 times that size. A beaver can get up to 100 pounds.
Yeah, the 110 pounder came out of Wisconsin. He's the record of trapped beavers that we know about. I think more
Well,
often I
40
will
pound
see.
coyote has no interest in going after a 100-pound beaver.
No, I mean, it's a terrible gamble, and it's a huge amount of work, even if it is successful, to wrestle an animal that's twice your weight. So I don't see that very often. Wolves are pretty good with hunting beavers if they live in the same habitat, because wolves are very smart. And so they will wait and hunker down by the beaver canals and wait for that moment when the beaver gets out of the water and goes on the land. And that's when the beaver's most vulnerable. And then the wolf will go for it. And it's not like every time they're successful. They're still largely unsuccessful hunting beavers. But as far as beaver predators go, they are one of the most successful.
Okay. All right. So again, I'm going to go back to Yellowstone. In an area like Yellowstone National Park, how many beavers make their home in a large national park like that?
That is a great question. And we don't know because there are no large scale beaver monitoring programs in the United States. We don't count them. We don't
Should we?
really, we should. We definitely should. Even if you don't want to increase their population or anything, you should count them because they're a natural resource. The way that they store water, the way that they change things. If, as a hydrologist, if I was going to go try to build a small dam on a stream, it would take me probably a year more to get the permits for that. And I'd have to go through the Army Corps and I'd have to go through the county and the state and everybody else. And that's for one little dam. And we've got beavers that'll build 5 to 10 dams and they don't pull permits and they don't do anything else. And if no other reason, that's why we should count them, because they're doing something that we know is really influential. We know building dams really changes water. But for some reason, we just don't acknowledge that beaver dams do that as dramatically as people dams do.
Well, you mentioned earlier, I've got so many things I want to talk to you about. You mentioned earlier that there are beavers in the desert, that people would be
Mhm.
surprised by that. Count me among them. I would not associate beavers with the desert. Where do I go to find beavers in the desert, and why are they there, and how are they surviving? I mean, I
Yeah.
associate beavers with water, and I associate desert with a lack of water. I'm not a genius, but it seems incompatible.
They, well, first, if you think about going through some of the famous deserts of Utah and Arizona and New
Mhm.
Mexico, you'll see a bizarre number of places that are named Beaver Dam, Beaver Creek, Beaver this, Beaver that. And before the fur trade, there were quite a few more beavers in the deserts. They've been lost. You wouldn't go to a super dry Red Rock Canyon as a westward settler and be like, Beaver Creek, unless you probably saw a beaver there. Today, you can go to the Mojave, you can go down into Mexico in Sonora, you can go to southern Arizona, you can go to a lot of New Mexico, you can go to most of the canyons of Colorado and Utah. You can raft the Colorado River and see beaver dams on all the tributaries going into it. Um, they love deserts. They don't have a problem with deserts. They will try to find more consistent sources of water. So slightly bigger rivers or groundwater springs are their favorites, but they make it work. And once they're there, they slow any water they get down. And so it gets easier for them to thrive after they've established. Starting from scratch in a desert's pretty hard, but if they can just lock on like in one wet year to one good spring, that can be enough to shift it from a very, very intermittent stream into something that's a little more consistent and perennial.
Mm. Talk to me about what kind of stream or river or creek can a beaver tackle? I mean, if they're looking, I mean, they're not stopping the Mississippi.
No.
But what are they damming?
They can dam fairly big waterways. They are not damming the main stem of the Mississippi, but they do live on the Mississippi and they will build dams in the floodplain of the Mississippi. So when you get up to high water, these fill up with a little bit more water. The beavers hold on to that. Low water, the big river drops back down. They still have the nice wetland fringe. So they do engineer big rivers, just not in the classic straight dam across way. Um, I don't know that I've seen a river that is wider than 50 feet that undammed that has a beaver dam on it. That being said, once a beaver has built a dam on a river or stream, that dam can be hundreds of feet long and really spread out the river water. It's just if it was already 50 feet wide and flowing at a good clip, that's a lot of force for the beavers to work against.
And is there
Maybe
a depth maximum that they like to work in?
Um, for damming, probably on the order of like 1 to 4 feet would be preferable, just because most beaver dams are on the order of 1 to 4 feet tall. They can build taller. I've been standing on top of a 12-foot tall beaver dam before. The stream was not 12 feet. It was really, really incised. It had been heavily damaged in a large flood event, and then the beavers dammed right up back to the floodplain. They push like whole tree trunks over to build with. It's really impressive.
Wow. Well, you don't seem to have lost any of your passion for beavers, which is
No.
cool. Um, I was thinking I was at Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge in North Carolina last week and saw nutrias and river otters. Um, any relationship there that I mean, any functional similarities between them?
Functional similarities, no. Relationships, yes. Beavers, I think, are frenemies with river otters because river otters really love beaver ponds, and river otters want to occupy beaver ponds because there's lots of fish, and they like to lay on top of the lodge and sun themselves and be, in my opinion, a little bit arrogant. Uh, but they will also eat baby beavers. And so if there's a baby beaver at home, the adults are going to do everything they can to chase the otters out. If there's not a baby at home, the beavers don't really care. It's not worth their time to try to manage these very playful and chaotic animals. Nutria, no relation. Functionally, nutria are invasive in the United States. They look very similar. So I think the biggest relationship beavers have to them is that people mistake one for the other and they don't know. And we call it, it's a joke in the beaver community, curse of the nutria, where there'll be an article about beavers and the front picture is a big old nutria. And you wouldn't know unless you're like deep in this world because if you don't see the tail, they look really similar. But there's these like tells, like little white whiskers. That's a nutria. Kind of beadier front facing eyes. That's a nutria. But it's not that big of a deal,
Well, for
honestly.
those watching on YouTube, I'm throwing up a picture now of a nutria from last week that I shot. And actually, I got also a river otter, so I'll throw that up as well, just so you can take a peek. So what are the risks and the downside? Is there any to the environment? I understand a rancher, farmer, a landowner not being thrilled about their land being flooded or their sacred tree being cut down. And I do not mean that facetiously. I have trees on my property that I care about. But outside of that, what is the downside? What is my fear or risk to habitat writ large?
That's a complicated question because 300 years ago, there was just so much more beaver wetland. And there are different ecosystems there today. There are now grasslands in some of these places. There has been forest encroachment in some of these places. And those are ecosystems too. And when a beaver moves in, it's going to change that. If there's a species that only lives in a dry pine forest, and then the beaver returns that to a wetland state, there's now less dry pine forest habitat. And maybe that's a really special and threatened species that lives there. That's kind of a question for us to wrestle with as scientists and environmentalists is like, what should it be? Should we allow it to revert to what it was 300 years ago? Should we try to protect what it is today because there's something else that's really sensitive there? Those are valid questions to ask. And I think sometimes it's a case by case basis. If beavers are moving into a bog that, in the Carolinas, it was home to this very special orchid or Venus flytraps or something like that, and then the beavers change it in a way that's unfavorable for those species, and now those species are super, super threatened, maybe that's not the place for beavers. Maybe we don't let them come back there, even if they were historically there. I think there's plenty of land that's lower conflict that we could encourage the beavers to come back in, and it's okay to make those decisions based on our priorities to an extent.
I think that's fascinating because when I talk to some of the rewilding people, like the Y2Y people, Jody Hilty and stuff, one of the interesting conversations is, what is the benchmark year for rewilding? Is it 1850? Is it 1650? Is it 1950? What is it? To your point, what are we trying to do? Because now this may be a great habitat. It might not be what it was during the Civil War or the Revolutionary War or World War II, but it has become a valuable and beloved habitat. Maybe we want to keep it. Maybe that's of some value. And I love the fact that you think that's an important part of the discussion, because compromise is not something I find in all conservationists. Empathy for people that have a different point of view is not pervasive in the community that you work in. And so I think it's great that you have that. I think that's important. And I'm excited about it. One of the things is we talk about climate change, not the politics of it, but just the fact that the climate is changing, and wildfires, we both lived in California, are a massive part of that change. Talk to me about the value of beavers and wildfire resilience and how they can play a role in maybe literally saving people's lives.
Yeah, this is the main thing that I research is beavers and wildfire. And
Really?
yeah, it's
Okay,
like
then the microphone is yours. Have fun.
my main line. Here we
Tell,
go.
yeah, tell me about it.
So it's you get fireproof wetlands from beavers, and some of them will have a little bit of burning. I'll touch on that in a second. But generally, beaver wetlands are uniquely fire resistant. They are 3 times more fire resistant than river corridors that don't have beavers on them. If you have mega fires that are just burning in incredibly extreme and catastrophic ways, about 90% of beaver wetland area is not burning in a destructive way. It's either not burning at all, or it's just a little bit of singeing along like you would get in a healthy burn. And we started noticing this and asking why. and where and how often? And also, why has no one talked about this before? And I don't have an answer for that last question. I don't know why it's been so ignored. But since I've started asking the question about beavers and fire, why do we keep seeing beaver wetlands not burning during wildfires? It's this big circle that all comes back to beavers slowing down water when it is raining or when you do have snowmelt. And they slow it down, they keep it on the land a little bit longer. And then that water gets into the soil and it keeps the plants really well watered and green. And then a drought comes, but because there's so much water stored in the beaver wetlands, they're protected from the drought. So they don't start to wither, they don't wilt. And then a lightning strike happens and a fire starts. And this is where it becomes common sense to me. If I wanted you to go build a campfire for us, and you came back with this huge armful of green leaves and wet trees, I would say, Scott, no, this won't burn. You know this won't burn. And that's what beaver wetlands are. It's green leaves and wet trees and also wet soil. And unlike other wetland types, you have an organism there that its whole purpose is to keep it wet. It's life or death for beavers to have water on the land. That is their safety mechanism. And so every single day, a beaver is thinking, is there enough water here? Can I get more water here? And it's that intentionality that makes beaver wetlands incredibly soggy. And as we've looked at them with remote sensing and on ground, over and over, we're seeing fire come up to the edge of beaver wetlands and then just fizzle out. And it can't get into them. It can't burn them. Sometimes it blows over to the other side and keeps going. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's just stopped. And with climate changing and with these fires getting more frequent and moving eastwards, it's not just a California problem. We had three absolutely wicked fires this past spring in Minnesota because it was a really dry spring. And that trend is going to continue. We need to have wet patches in the land. We need more natural fire-resistant infrastructure in the land. And we don't have enough people and time and money to do it all ourselves. So that's where beavers come in, because it's instinctual, they're really good at it, and it takes zero encouraging. We just have to let the beaver be the beaver, and we get this boon to our own firefighting.
And are you finding, as climate changes and fires explode and they move eastward, that the people that are involved in the decisions, the governments and whatnot that are the state and federal and local governments, are they more open to the conversation of, guys, let me cut loose a dozen beavers and in weeks, because literally it's weeks, right? I mean, you said they could build the first dam within a week. So we're seeing water retention. I mean, you put a beaver out there in March and in April we have water retention. Is that message being received better than it was 5 years ago?
Absolutely. When I first started studying beavers and thought about drought and wildfire, I remember being told by someone that this will go nowhere because this is so niche and it's like, this is just a little pet project to study. And then we just enter this period of horrific wildfire and drought and this period of shining the limelight right on beavers and showing what they can do. And it took off, and states have changed their policies around beavers. California established a statewide beaver restoration program to help with climate change and to help with fire. And in my experience, it does take a disaster for people to listen. So I wasn't hearing a whole lot about it in like the Dakotas, for example, until fire started creeping over and Colorado was burning a lot more and Wyoming was burning more. And it's now like, oh, shoot, let's get those beavers back stat. In addition to the biodiversity and other benefits, we have a lot of fire risk and we have a lot of people that live right in the fire risk area. When you have cabin country, when you have ranches that are integrated with your public lands, that they're integrated into large swaths of wilderness, those are highly at risk. And you need your landscape to be resilient to help those folks, because doing evacuations and doing firefighting around 100 incredibly spread out structures is difficult. It's a lot harder than protecting a city where you just have to worry about the borders. And when that starts happening and people start feeling that fear, they start talking to their county, they start talking to their state, and the state starts to listen because it's actually pretty low risk. Just let the beaver be the beaver. It's not like they're going to destroy the state while you give them a chance.
Great bumper sticker, by the way. You've said it a couple of times. I like that. Just let the beaver be the beaver. That works well. So while nobody wants a Palisades fire or a Jasper National Park fire, they are motivators for conversation and potentially for change, right?
Absolutely.
So when a fire does go through an area, and let's say there weren't beavers and the fire went through and Now we're looking out at devastation, which, that's the thing about fires is they're hugely visible when they're done.
Hmm.
Even if there's no structures, you just look out and you're looking at devastation. Can we put beavers in there right away as part of the restoration? Can we go to Palisades, the surrounding areas, and say, guys, this isn't an I told you so, but how about if we drop some beavers in now?
It depends. If there's any patches of habitat left, I think that's a good candidate for bringing back beavers as long as there's good habitat. If it's just one of these absolutely catastrophic fires and everything's charred, that's where we have to be the beaver to start. And we have to kickstart restoration. And we do that by building fake beaver dams called beaver dam analogs. And so we start trying to slow
Really?
down water ourselves, and we try to build back up the habitat ourselves until it's just good enough that maybe real beavers can come in, because we are kindergartners compared to them. They are the PhDs of wetland creation.
Okay. So is that easier from a permit point of view, from a regulations point of view, for you to build a kindergarten beaver dam?
Uh, no, because the beaver doesn't need a permit. But in terms of moving beavers, it is easier than that.
No, I mean, you were saying like if you go through an area that's been devastated,
Mhm.
we need to start it. We need to kickstart that. And you had talked earlier about how difficult it is for humans to get a
Mhm.
permit to build a dam on a stream. It takes a year just to get the permits,
Yeah.
and a week later, our beavers have a dam. When you're going back out to an area like Palisades, is it still the same lengthy process
Yeah,
to
it doesn't
throw up,
have
what
to
did you
be.
call it, a beaver dam analog?
Mhm.
Is that the same permitting process as a concrete dam?
No, it's not. And partially because beaver dam analogs are never built to be permanent. They should move, they should degrade over time, they should never be there 50 years down the road in their original form. And that gets them into a different permitting pipeline. And then,
Okay.
especially post disaster, there are expedited permits when we need them post disaster. The very first rainfall after these fires, everything is coming off the hill slopes into the river. You want to catch all that ash before it gets into your drinking water or plugs up some facility downstream. Get the BDAs out. And so they can be permitted quite quickly in a post disaster context. If you're not post disaster, it's still a faster permit in most places than a concrete dam.
Okay. And who's building beaver dam analogs? Who does
Um,
that? I mean, Palisades calls and says, we've heard of these beaver dam analogs and we want some. I mean, is there a beaver dam analog corporation, or who's doing that? I've
there
never
are
known anyone.
companies
I mean, how does that go?
There are companies that'll build them professionally. There's in places that have had more positive beaver interactions recently, there's more companies. So there's several in California, there's a number in Colorado and Wyoming, Washington, Oregon. There's not many out in the Midwest, there's not many on the East Coast. Uh, but sometimes people just get trained to build them, or they're not that hard. You push sticks and mud and stone around. And if it's a place that is a flashier stream or steeper, maybe you put some wooden posts into the stream bank, but not so deep that they'll never move. And yeah, you just either hire one of these companies or you look up how to do it and maybe give a call to one of the people that does this for their living and get some advice. And we have like Conservation Corps will go out and build them. We've had Trout Unlimited volunteers have built quite a few. Random volunteer days build a lot. I helped build some at a monastery in Iowa, and we did some build a beaver days where people could come volunteer and build beaver dam analogs with us
In a monastery
in
in
Iowa.
Iowa.
Yeah,
Okay, that just sounds like a Hollywood movie right there. That's a. It also sounds like you could just get a bunch of 12-year-old kids, because every 12-year-old kid has dammed up a tiny stream somewhere.
yeah.
We just have. That's part of growing up. That's what you did, well, that's fantastic. So tell me, what are some of the best recent success stories?
Hmm. One of the recent success stories that I think is a really good one is just the beavers doing their thing. So I have some
Let
field
beavers
sites.
be beavers.
Let the beavers be beavers. I've got some field sites in California, and in 2021 there were a lot of wildfires in the Sierras and in Northern California. And in one of these sites there was a beaver complex, and it was just one family. and they're pretty isolated. And I've been looking at them in a drought context and kind of hoping that they would expand and change this landscape so I could see it. And then it fire blasts through. And I have low confidence that these beavers are going to be okay because it's such a small complex and they had such a hard time working that landscape. And the satellite imagery after the fire indicated that maybe some of that greenery was still there, but because it was such a small complex and satellite data is kind of big pixels, wasn't sure what it was going to look like. And I drive up there, and the drive is just absolutely harrowing because there's these dead standing trees everywhere, and it's silent because there's no leaves anymore and all the animals are gone. And you come around the corner, and I don't have a super good view, so I throw my drone up in the air to look downstream before hiking in. And as soon as the drone is up, I just see this huge green patch, and it is bright green, and there's water, and I'm like, now I'm excited. So I pack up the car, zoom down the dirt road, get to the green patch, and it's like the fire never touched it. It is perfectly fine. It's so loud. There's fish jumping. There's all these little Sierra tree frogs everywhere. And we stay out in the evening, and the beavers come out, and we can hear them whining and talking to their kits. So not only did they survive, but their family survived. The landscape is doing great where they are. And apparently every animal with a 10-mile radius is now using this beaver wetland. There's bears, there's fish, there's birds, there's like 7 herons in a pretty small area, which does say we probably needed more beavers up there. This isn't enough habitat to support the entirety of the Pumice National Forest, but it was really, really good to see. And it was a situation where I think the beavers were really challenged by the fire, and they still persisted. And that was great.
Well, it sounds like there's a doctoral thesis there for somebody.
Yeah.
That's a great thing. I would love to keep going, but we're getting to the end of our hour, and let's end on a high note. So for the people who are listening on Apple or Spotify or any of the podcast platforms, thank you so much. If you've got questions for me, you can email me, scott@naturallyscott.com. If you've got questions for Emily, I'll forward them to her. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to throw my email address up. And again, same thing. You got questions, send them. I love questions. And now I'm going to ask Emily to recommend a book, any nature-based book that you think the audience would enjoy and benefit by. Please go ahead.
I think that everybody should read Eager by Ben Goldfarb. It is lovingly referred to as sort of the text of the beaver world at this point. He just did such a good job going around the country and learning about beavers and trying to understand why people are so hyped up about them. And like through this book and through this journey, he too becomes quite hyped up about beavers. And it does a great job. It's very plain language written. It's not some like textbook that's difficult and boring to read. It truly tells the story of beavers and why they matter.
And really, he named a book about beavers, Eager, as in Eager Beaver.
Uh-huh.
Okay, well, you know what? You got to give him credit. I still love your documentary. The title of the documentary, the Beaver documentary. So this has been spectacular, Emily. This has been a treat for me. I hope it's not the only time we do this. I'm certain that you have plenty more you can share as the world changes, and it is. And as your world changes, and assuming you don't go back into weaponry.
Not on the plan.
we should be okay. If you are watching us on YouTube, do me a favor and hit subscribe. Every time you do, YouTube pushes the show out to other people. You'll notice there's no ads. This is all on my nickel. I'm happy to do it. I'm thrilled about the show and the people that we're reaching. But the more people we reach, the more we get the message out, whether it's about invertebrates or grizzly bears or beavers, the better the world is and the more guests we can attract. So hit subscribe, drop a comment or like or whatever you want to do. And Emily, I try to wrap up each show, most importantly saying thank you to the guests. So thank you so much for being a part of this. And then I encourage everybody to get outside. And whether that outside is your back porch, your backyard, your local park, a national park, whatever it might be, get out there because there's always something great to see and do and hear and listen and feel and taste. And when you do, make sure that you stay safe and stay curious. Emily, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
You bet.